let's dive in. Why? So you talk about revenge as being the world's deadliest addiction. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought of revenge as such, but you make a really compelling case. So let's get into it. Why is revenge the world's deadliest addiction? And what do we do to quench the desire in all of us to get revenge?
Yeah. So, I mean, the short answer is that your brain on revenge, it turns out, looks like your brain on drugs in brain scans. So we know at a neurological level that our brains are reacting to the desire for revenge in the same way, and we crave it in the same way that we do for drugs, alcohol, and other behavioral addictions. Now, it's triggered in a certain and specific way, and that is to say, it starts with a grievance. And we can think of a grievance as a real or imagined perception of having been wronged or mistreated, shamed, humiliated, betrayed, those types of experiences. And those experiences activate in our brains the pain network. So they're very, we feel pain when somebody insults us or we're shamed or humiliated. We feel deep pain. But it turns out you can see that pain. You can see it activating the pain network in the brain, which is the anterior insula. And the brain hates pain, and it wants to cover it up with some pleasure. Some dopamine is a nice thing to cover pain with. And we've evolved as humans to derive enormous pleasure from inflicting pain upon the person who hurt us or their proxy. So a couple of weird things there. One is it's a real or imagined grievance. So it can be an imaginary grievance that no one else in the world would suspect. And your target of revenge can be a proxy, as in not the actual person who wronged you.
Wow. So we're actually getting to the neuroscience behind the phrase hurt people hurt people.
Correct. Yes, that is a true statement. And now we do have the neuroscience to show how that works and why.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what it was bringing up for me, some of the data suggesting that when we take Tylenol, which is a pain-relieving analgesic drug, that there's an emotional impact on it, that the same networks in the brain that are involved in pain, in the perception of pain, are also activated when we are emotionally when we're hurt emotionally.
Psychological pain,
Yeah.
right? And psychological and physical pain. And I think they do register, the neuroscience shows, in the same area, this pain network, the anterior insula. So I think that is true. And our psychological pain that comes from traumatic experiences registers in this area. And psychological pains, it seems from the research, is more likely to activate a violent response from someone, revenge seeking through violence, than often physical pains will. So these pains that we experience, especially shame and humiliation, betrayals, these types of things. Social exclusion is another big one. If you're cast out of a group or not allowed into the group that you want to be part of. These experiences are really seriously painful inside our brain, and our brains strive very hard to manage that pain and rebalance themselves, because pain throws the brain out of balance. It's viewed, and that's what happens in all addictions, is there's an imbalance, and the brain starts to seek pleasure in response to this unexpected or expected pain.
But why is it that revenge, I mean, it does bring about that temporary pleasure, but it more often than not, I would say, it leads to regret. Like whenever I've sought and achieved revenge, I've always regretted it.
Yeah.
In the aftermath.
Yeah.
Maybe not like in the immediate time frame, but subsequently, inevitably, like I've always regretted saying the thing I shouldn't have said, or so why does that occur?
Yeah, and research has shown that that's very true. So revenge almost always comes with a negative consequence. It may be a negative consequence to you, as you've just described, Max, your own regret, remorse, kind of even potential shame for what you've done, or you've maybe not held to a standard that you strived for, and now you've found you've just done something you're going to have to apologize for, maybe. So that's a negative consequence, one of the negative consequences for the revenge seeker, right? The person who has this. And I should mention, so the grievance triggers the reward and pleasure circuitry of the brain. That's the nucleus accumbens and the dorsal striatum. These are the two areas that are involved with addiction, craving, and habit formation. Okay, so the way that the brain is seeking this dopamine hit and pleasure is by activating that circuitry. And the craving that is produced is this desire to inflict pain upon the other person. And that is pleasurable. It's pleasurable to think about it. And that's been shown study after study. It's pleasurable to do it. But as we were discussing, it has a lot of negative consequences, including not only this remorse, but it can actually increase your anger level. It can also, of course, and maybe the biggest negative consequence is it can put you in harm's way, because your act of justice seeking, and revenge can be thought of as justice seeking, right? It's, I want to balance the scales. You hurt me, we're going to balance the scales. I'm going to hurt you back. That's the instinct. And that's evolved. It was an adaptive strategy, and it is. We all have it. So the desire for revenge is not in any way pathological. It's the desire for revenge coupled with the inability to control it and stop it, despite the negative consequences, that leads it into a pathological state, addiction, and violence, if that's the end game for some people. And most revenge seeking is not violent, but revenge seeking becomes the root cause of almost every form of violence. We kind of know that now is the singular motivation. When there's a mass shooting or a shooting of any kind, and the reporters and people go, what was the motive of the killer? And I can answer almost categorically in all cases, revenge.
Wow.
So we know that now. The question that people really are asking is, what was the grievance that triggered that revenge desire? So we have to think about grievance as a triggering or activating moment that converts through the reward circuitry into a motivation to harm somebody back.
Wow.
That's the true process that happens.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, everybody gets hurt. I mean, you accumulate cuts just as by virtue of living. So are there more productive ways of resolving grievances that don't lead to revenge?
Oh, for sure. And I guess a couple of things on that. One insight that we can now take from understanding revenge seeking is an addictive process, or it can become an addictive process for just about anyone at any point in time. I say that, and that may be a bit of an overstatement. We don't know how many people move from just having addictive feelings, revenge cravings, to an addiction. We know that in substance use disorders, maybe about 20% of people who try certain drugs or alcohol become addicted. So that means 80% are not, right? They're able to turn away from it when they want to. So we can suspect that maybe around that same number of people could become addicted to revenge seeking, which just happens to overlap with about the amount of people in, let's say, the American population that have true experience in the criminal justice system over a lifetime, right? So maybe 20%. And so we can get this 20% potential risk factor for anybody, and some smaller percentage of that are going to become seriously violent. But understanding this as a brain biological addictive process, and not as evil, as some evil dark force, or people who are just born as monsters to be monsters, just rarely, not even rarely, it's not the case. What you can do is then embrace and empower society to use addiction-informed recovery processes and techniques on violence to create a true public health approach to preventing and treating violence. And we can do that by using the addiction techniques that are already established, that have been well researched, and society has been investing billions of dollars for the last 30 years in this endeavor, and we have a lot of good techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy and counseling and motivational interviewing, and maybe we're getting closer and closer to anti-craving drugs that can tamp down the revenge craving. Perhaps it hasn't been studied yet.
Ozempic,
but yes, I was going to say, and thank you for bringing it up. GLP-1 drugs are anti-craving drugs that are being studied for other addictions.
That's wild.
And they're seeing, in early research at least, effectiveness, right, in reducing cravings. And it may be that one day those types of drugs can help people who truly have revenge addiction, where they cannot control their desire to lash out and harm other people and themselves in the process. So that's one solid way of doing this. And then there's another, even more effective, faster acting resource that we all have already built in and wired for in our minds, that we can talk about, and that's called forgiveness. And that process, we now have neuroscience that shows us what forgiveness does in the brain, and it's very different from the common conception of what forgiveness might be. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, I would love to get into that. Forgiveness is, it's such an important virtue. I had Mark Leita on the podcast recently, who's the creator of Soft White Underbelly. Are you at all familiar with that YouTube channel? Yeah, I'm obsessed with
Soft White Underbelly.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me.
Yeah, it's I talk about it a lot because I think it's one of the most fascinating creative projects. It's Mark is a former commercial photographer who basically decided, almost from one day to the next, he was like doing these highly polished jobs for creative agencies, for big brands and whatever. And it was just, it felt so fake. It was just like so much artifice in that world that he really wanted to do something more meaningful. And he began, I guess, interviewing. He had a studio down on Skid Row in Los Angeles, and he began interviewing what he would describe as the most marginalized individuals of society. So people who are, addicts, fentanyl, meth, crack, and sex workers, pimps, people who have had severe childhood trauma, people who have had, the kinds of grievances like that people like you and I can hardly understand. I can't even imagine. But one of the interesting things to have come up in the conversation that I had with him on the show was that sometimes you hear these incredible stories of forgiveness, like people who have had, there's one guest in particular, I forget his name, it was maybe Jerry. He had half of his face blown off by somebody via shotgun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and but in the interview, he forgives. He forgives the person who did that to him.
That is amazing.
And it's just a really powerful example of.
It is, and that is a very powerful example. And you called it a virtue, and we tend to think of it in those terms, right? Philosophical terms, religious terms, sometimes as well. And the neuroscience, though, shows us that there's a really powerful brain biological process and change that the human brain goes through with forgiveness that isn't as soft as virtue or necessarily as a religious belief, and it's what I was taught or what I was what I heard or what I'm encouraged to be like in life, and that is this. So I was saying, with revenge seeking, it's the grievance, which activates the pain network, the anterior insula, which activates the pleasure and reward circuitry, the dorsal striatum and the nucleus accumbens. And the last part of this is, especially for addiction, it deactivates the prefrontal cortex, which is your self-control and executive function circuitry. And that pulls away kind of the last break that exists in your brain between you and harming somebody else and maybe yourself. So that's what's happening with revenge seeking, grievance triggered revenge seeking. Here's what's happening with forgiveness. It turns out in brain scans that when you look at someone who's given an opportunity to forgive and to imagine forgiving, that's all you really need to do. And your listeners can experience this by just, when it's safe to do, just close your eyes, think of a grievance that's bothering you, and just imagine forgiving it. You don't have to forgive, but just imagine what you might feel like if you decide to forgive. And here's what's going to happen inside your brain. The first thing that happens is that pain network, the anterior insula, shuts down. So forgiveness, that decision, even just to imagine it, turns the pain off. I mean, it's like, Tylenol on, times a million, because it actually shuts the pain down. The next thing it does is it shuts down the pleasure and reward revenge craving circuitry. So that these nagging cravings and ruminations about, man, I'd love to get back at this person, and here's what I'm gonna do, and here's what I'd like to do, and how can I get it done, and how can I do it without, harming myself? All those craving thoughts, those are stilled by forgiveness. And then the last part of it is that it activates or reactivates that executive function circuitry in your mind, the prefrontal cortex. So forgiveness has these amazing brain neurological changes that it offers. And you don't have to take a drug to get these benefits. And you don't have to tell the person who wronged you that you're forgiving them. It's irrelevant. Forgiveness is for you, the victim. It's not for the perpetrator. And you can do it in private, and you're better off doing it in private so that nobody can shake your decision. And you can do it and use it. I mean, this is like a drug that you can take as often as you want with no negative consequences. So it's kind of this, I think of it as a human superpower or a wonder drug that's unused and misunderstood because we tie it up a lot with, in a masculine society, for instance, we tie it up with weakness, and we go, oh, I can't forgive somebody. That's me being weak and me being vulnerable and me choosing to be a victim all the time. It's not. It's choosing to heal yourself from a past victimization. And I want to make clear that when I talk about revenge in these ways, I'm talking about trying to inflict pain upon someone for a wrong that they committed in the past. And this is all very temporally tied. So past wrongs are avenged. Present threats of future or present harm are self-defense.
Right.
And this does not in any way suggest that people should not defend themselves under threat or remove themselves from a toxic relationship and become anybody's doormat. That's not part of it. It's all about how to heal from the pains of the past. Self-defense and getting out of toxic relationships, that's completely separate and needs to be followed in order to prevent more wrongs from happening in the future that you'll now want to avenge.
Wow, that's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
That's I'm glad you clarified that, because it's like, we don't want grievances to live in our heads rent free. I mean, or like, people who have wronged us in the past, but I mean, if you're in a situation where you're continually being wronged, this isn't to suggest that you shouldn't make an effort to get out of that situation.
That's right. Or defend yourself by whatever means are acceptable and necessary to avoid that continual or future harm. Yes. But to punish people, that's what revenge is really about, right? It's about punishing somebody for what they did. That's a past tense verb, right? What they did in the past. And there you're looking at, and let me put it this way. Almost all perpetrators see themselves as victims. You almost, by necessity, to become a perpetrator of any wrong, especially violence, had to at some point have perceived, that's what, with a grievance, perceived yourself to having been wronged. So, like you said at the beginning of this, about hurt people hurt people. And that's so very true. But it's a perception. So somebody else's or your own. Let's just put it in this terms. If you wanted to hurt someone for what they've done to you, you're going to believe as the victim, you're just carrying out an act of justice, and it is justified, right? It is part of justice seeking, and I'm entitled to it because you hurt me. But to them, that is an injustice that is coming at them, and they were going to perceive themselves as a victim of your justice seeking. And that's why these revenge cycles are they're always cyclical, and they're very difficult to stop unless something intervenes, like forgiveness, or like removing that craving, that desire for revenge from your brain, or getting it back under control. And I have a personal experience that I relate in the book, very serious, almost led to a shooting.
I read about it. Yeah. You almost became a mass shooter yourself.
Correct. Yeah. And I can share that with you a little bit if you want. So, and it kind of illustrates a lot of what we've been talking about. So when I was young, my folks moved my dad moved my family to my great-grandfather's farm when I was about 12 years old. So, I was just descending at that moment for the first time in my life into kind of rural farm country. And we were surrounded by a bunch of big dairy farms, working dairy farms, big herds of cattle. And it was a great place to be a 12-year-old, I thought.
It was in Pennsylvania,
It was in Pennsylvania, so
what part?
Central Pennsylvania. The hitch is that, when I got there, I wanted to befriend the farm kids who lived on the farms around us. But our farm, although it was like a 100-acre farm, but we were not a working farm. My dad wasn't a farmer, he was an insurance agent. And so he would go to town in the morning wearing a suit and shiny shoes, and their dads were up hours before my dad was rolling out of bed, and they were in their milking parlors, with covered in manure, milking the cows and feeding their cows. And so there was a difference in authenticity, perhaps, and there was a difference maybe in maybe socioeconomic status, just lifestyle completely. We lived on a farm, but we weren't really running the farm that way. I was running it with my great-grandfather. My dad had nothing to do with it. So I reached out to these guys. I tried to befriend them. I joined like Future Farmers of America, and I'm telling you, honest truth, when I was that age, between like 12 and 16, my goal was to be a farmer, right? I wanted to grow up to become a farmer. So I really wanted to be part of their community, and they were having none of it and were shunning me and excluding me. And I wasn't going to be denied, and so I kept trying to, win their favor. And eventually their shunning turned into bullying, and the bullying, started verbally at first, and then it was kind of like pushing and shoving, getting on and off the bus and going through the halls at school. And then it became like punching and kicking and things like that. So it started to become pretty miserable and pretty intense for me. So one night, I'm now 16, 17 years old. So were the guys that were doing this to me. So we're all old enough to drive. We had driver's licenses. And one night, we're all asleep, my parents and my brother and I, and we wake up to the sound of a gunshot in the middle of the night. And we run to the windows, and I look out the window, and I see this pickup truck owned by one of the kids who had been tormenting me, and it's taken off down the road. So we look around the house to see if there's any damage, and there wasn't anything. We just wrote it off as, they were probably in the middle of the night kind of maybe shooting deer. It's illegal, but it's not uncommon to use a spotlight and hunt deer that way. So we went back to bed. One of my jobs the next morning and every morning before school was to wake up and take care of our animals. So we had a small herd of Black Angus cattle, pigs, chickens, and a really sweet beagle who was our hunting dog named Paula. So I went up to her pen to feed and water her, and found her with a bullet hole in her head and was just laying dead in a pool of blood. So they had come and actually, killed my dog.
Wow.
Just to get revenge for what? Trying to befriend them, I guess, and being an outsider.
What sons of bitches.
It's just outrageous, right?
Holy shit.
Just terrible, yeah. So, parents were not happy about that, called the state police. Rural central Pennsylvania, they cover, thousands of square miles, and they're like, this is terrible. we're taking the report down. If more things happen or if it becomes human violence or something, we'll want to know about it. But otherwise, we're not really going to do much about this right now.
Wow.
So, and my dad really couldn't, I think, because he was an insurance agent. He was selling insurance to farmers, so he wasn't going to rock the boat with the farmers around us. About 2 weeks later-ish, I'm home at night by myself. My parents are out, and I hear a vehicle coming to a stop in front of our house. We live on like a one-lane country road. So I, get up, start looking out the window to see what's happening, and there's a flash and an explosion. And out of the smoke of that explosion roars this same pickup truck, and in the opposite direction is, like our mailbox, mangled and flying into the cornfield. So they blew up our mailbox.
The same pickup truck.
Same pickup truck, same guys. And
at that point, did you know for a fact that it was that it had belonged to one of these kids?
Yeah, I mean, I had no doubt that it was their truck.
Whoa.
And so, there was no doubt in my mind, actually. And I conveyed that, to my parents, and I think to the police. I'm like, I've been being harassed by these guys and bullied for several years now, and I know who did that. We saw the truck flying down the road after the gunshot. So there was no doubt there. And that night, that second night after the mailbox explosion, when it detonated, it sort of detonated what self-control I had left. And I had never, up to this point, confronted, or retaliated against these guys in any way. I, just kind of put up with this abuse and bullying. But I wasn't going to take it anymore. So, we had been, and my dad was a hunter. I'd probably been shooting guns since I was about 8 years old. We had lots of guns. He had a loaded revolver in a nightstand. I ran up, I grabbed it out of the nightstand. I ran back through the house, jumped outside into my mother's car, and I took off after those guys, like driving down this country road, like 100 miles an hour, just shouting and screaming in rage. And I eventually caught up with them, and I cornered them by a barn on one of their farms. So, I had my high beams on, and I pulled up behind their truck, and there's like 3 or 4 heads in the back window of their pickup truck. And they start to slowly get out of the car, and they're squinting, through my high beams, trying to figure out who had just come roaring down their driveway. It took me, some time to catch up. What was clear to me in that moment as they got out and they were looking back was they weren't armed, and they couldn't have known that I had a gun. So it was kind of ideal conditions, right, for balancing the scales here. Just pure, basic.
Exacting revenge.
I'm going to do to you and more what you've done to me, because how could you guys have done this all these years and escalated it to such an extreme extent? And what else might you do in the future, right? I don't know what the next move that they had in their minds was. So I start to get out of the car. I grab the gun off the passenger seat. And as I'm getting out, I open the door. I'm starting to step my leg through the opening. I have this just short moment insight of inspiration that, or insight, I guess it is, that projects me a little bit into my future and sort of gives me this realization. So if you go through with what you want to do here, you're not going to be the same you after this moment as you were for all of the years of your life prior. You may die in the process. You may go to jail too. But also, at a minimum, you're going to always have to know yourself as a murderer. And it was clear to me that was not who I was, and not who I was willing to accept myself becoming, just to gratify this need. And it's just powerful male, often, it's even more prevalent among males, this need to get back and maybe grabs back some of the dignity and self-respect that I felt like they had robbed from me over these years. And it's like, I'll take care of you, and that will restore for me, my ego, my everything, my identity, my maleness, everything. Anyway, that happened in a flash, and that flash was just enough for me to stop and pull my leg back in, because I was like, I'm not going to do this. I don't care how bad I want it. And that was lucky. It was a gift. I mean, it was like an internal gift, because a lot of people don't stop. I mean, we see it in the news every day. They don't stop. They can't stop. They, I think, probably get the same kind of insight that I had. But their, this prefrontal cortex, if we talk about it in neurological terms, is, for whatever reason, not available, or it's been hijacked or inhibited by these revenge cravings, and by maybe a life that was different from mine. I had been raised by good people. I had the resources I needed to survive. I wasn't subjected to violence or witnessing violence in my younger years, like people often go through. And so, anyway, I was lucky, and I drove away.
Well, I'm glad you didn't do it, but what about, I mean, you're a lawyer. Mm-hmm. What about the fact that these kids deserve justice? Like there, regardless of whether or not you decided to exact revenge, and I'm glad you didn't, we're still left with this imbalance where they did some really awful things to you, and it doesn't seem like justice has been served.
Right. So,
and I'm shocked that the cops were under no obligation to intervene, by the way.
Yeah. Maybe time, place. They do have the discretion to do what they want to do. And it's not especially in the early 80s, it is not a true crime to kill somebody's dog. I mean, murder is for humans. It's not, you can't be arrested for murdering an animal.
If somebody broke into my house and killed my cat, mm-hmm. I would want to see them dead. Like I don't know if I'd be able to stop myself from shooting them in the head.
Right, because
if they did that.
Your cat, you view your cat as a family member, right?
1,000%.
And we view our dogs and cats in particular as members of our families. And so if you come and kill a member of our family, we're going to pretty much be at full max revenge seeking, right?
Eye for an eye.
Right. And we can call it justice. So let's talk about justice, because that's a critical thing, and I explore that in some detail in the book. Justice is the polite, politically correct term we use for revenge. Okay, justice, there are two forms of justice. There's justice in the form of revenge, and then there's equity and fairness justice, right? And there's social justice, Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Jesus and other people like that. That form of justice, let's put it in like terror terms. I explain in the book what happened to America after 9/11. George Bush came out and he said, we're going to bring the terrorists to justice. Did he mean we're going to be fair and equitable and honorable with terrorists? Or did he mean what we all knew he meant, which was we're going to get revenge. We're going to get them. We're going to kill them because they killed 3,000 people, innocent victims who just went to work that day and never went home. But that's what he meant. But it is unacceptable for an American president to say we're going to get revenge. And it's unacceptable in our own minds to use that word because it seems kind of ugly and harsh and brutal and murderous. But justice, when you call revenge-seeking justice, you've sanctified it instantly just by using that word, because justice has all these beautiful meanings. And so you're saying to yourself or to people around you, by going to, let's say, to war against terrorists, we are all, the soldiers and the whole American enterprise that is behind them, we're all engaged in this noble act, this religiously sanctioned act of being fair and being equitable and balancing the scales in this way that allows bombs and torture and genocide and machine guns and every other form of killing that we've invented as human beings. And that is how normal, good, beautiful people can become killers or the supporters of killers because of the pain that we have to deal with when we are really seriously injured like we were on 9/11. That pain was so enormous. And there were two ways of managing it. One was some form of forgiveness with a smaller response, a very narrowly tailored, find out exactly who was behind this. And if they represent a threat and we're going to act in self-defense, that's one thing. That's an act of violence in self-defense. But once that threat is removed, why are we still, how long did those wars last? 10 years plus? Until Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. I mean, $8 trillion. I mean, it just almost 500,000 people were killed. Those are things that you can do because you think you've made yourself misbelieve that you're doing something honorable by retaliating. And so I would say there is no distinction, real meaningful distinction between justice and revenge. Mm. And if we talk about me being a lawyer, because you brought that up, because that's what so I couldn't become a farmer, right? I mean, after that whole scene, my farmer career was over, and I needed to come up with something else. And what I landed upon is the idea of I could go into the professional revenge business, the professional justice-seeking business, and get a license, the only license in society where the only people who have this license to prescribe and manufacture and distribute revenge are lawyers. We're the ones, like doctors who are licensed to prescribe and distribute opioids, right? And so it's an addictive drug. And we only let a certain type of people who has a certain amount of schooling and a certain license to distribute it. And we pay them a lot of money because what they're doing is distributing this powerfully addictive drug that everybody wants, right? Even more than the people who want opioids or the people who want revenge, because all of us do. And so I'm like, I want in on that, because I felt like, having left the scene of the almost crime without having done anything to balance the scales and get justice, like you said, I made myself maybe vulnerable. And I didn't want to become a victim in the future, but I didn't want to go to jail or kill anybody either. So I'm like, here's the quote unquote right way to do this, is to become a lawyer. And that's how I entered that profession.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody, I just think it's like when, like, the mailbox is a little bit gray because nobody, that situation's lives more in the gray because nobody got hurt.
Yeah.
But I think when it's like you're inflicting injury onto, another entity, I think that's when, like, if I love my cat Delilah so much, and your story, like, I was getting like I was like I could almost feel like myself welling up thinking about that happening to my cat, to her. And I would not lose sleep at night were I to reciprocate, were somebody to do that to her. I mean, I would just like, to me that would be the only form of justice. And in lieu of that, I mean, it might take me years to forgive, but that would not be the preferred outcome. The preferred outcome would be a sense of justice being served.
Right. So think about why. Why do you want that? Because if you step back a little bit, and I'm glad you shared that, and I really appreciate you doing that. What I did after I left the law and became a violence researcher at Yale is what became important to me and fascinated by was, first, I felt like I had become addicted to this revenge-seeking, justice in form of revenge-seeking spiral as a litigator, as a lawyer who is hired by people to go out and get revenge for them because they have a grievance. They have a problem with somebody and they've been harmed, and they want to inflict pain upon the other person, but they don't want, to pick up a gun. So they'll hire a lawyer. And now. So they've hired me, and I'm a kind of a warrior mercenary to go and do that for them. But what happened for me over time is that as I did that and had wins and losses, each time I got a win, there was this powerful, gratifying high, right? This dopamine release. Now I know, but at the time I didn't know what was going on. But I was high, and then those highs were short-lived, and then I was left kind of feeling worse, but wanting more and trying to get more of it again and again. And it started bleeding into my personal life, and I started to become kind of a litigator extraordinaire at home with my wife, with my kid, family members, neighbors, whoever it was that kind of got on the wrong side of me. I could become a legal bully, right? And the research shows that the bullies are generally, and the people who are at highest risk of becoming a bully are victims of bullies. So bully victims become bullies at a much higher rate than anybody else.
Wow.
And bullies themselves, the research also shows the primary motivation for a person who is doing bullying is that they feel that they have been victimized by someone else and are seeking justice in the form of revenge through their bullying. And we just add to that this idea of any target can work. So you can get revenge by proxy, which is to say, if you're a bully, and let's say your home life is like you're getting abused by your caregivers, right, your parents, you can't retaliate against them because you're a kid. So what do? You have these urges to retaliate, and revenge urges have been witnessed as young as toddler years. A toddler will respond and retaliate if you take an ice cream cone from them. So what happens is, for the bully who can't retaliate safely against the parent or caregiver, they'll pick on a perceived weaker target at school who becomes their proxy for their parent, and they can now just kind of inflict as much misery on that person as they're receiving at home. And, that kind of happens throughout society. And, there's these, power imbalances, but we can, and up all the way through mass shooters who might shoot 12 people that had nothing to do with them. But when you go back in their history, and the FBI and Secret Service have done this, find that, in almost all cases, they're revenge seekers, and they're defined by law enforcement as grievance collectors. They collect grievances in their lives. Whether the rest of us would agree with those grievances is irrelevant, because they're painful for them. And it's irrelevant to anybody's. My grievances, you might go, I don't know why you're excited about this, man. This is minor. But for me, it might be enormous and driving me toward a serious act. So, moving towards the going from the law into seeking out the answer to why do we crave inflicting pain on other people when we're in pain. We could just want, for instance, we could be wired to just want cotton candy. I mean, think about that for a second. I insult you, or even if worse, I come in, I kill your cat. You could be wired to want cotton candy to make yourself feel better, but you're not. You are wired that the one and only thing you really, really want at the deepest craving level is to come and kill me.
Oh, because
I killed your cat.
I'm going to go full John Wick.
Right. You're going to Wick, right? Yeah. And I am, right. I have like a living John Wick story. I mean, and people have brought that up. I remember the first time I was actually on the Daily Show, and Ronnie Chang, the comedian, he said, and I had never seen John Wick, and he's like, this is a John Wick story. And I said, who's John Wick? And he just cracked up. He's like, are you dead? How could you not know what that means? But it's true. And so why do we desire another person's pain? This gives us nothing of any economic value, right? You killing me for killing your cat gives you zero, right? I mean, you got no material exchange. You didn't get any money. You didn't get anything at all other than the pleasure of knowing that you killed me. That's it. And you're willing to risk your life and all that you care about, and the risk of the regret and the shame and labeling yourself a murderer. All these things, all these high prices, negative consequences, just to get that dopamine release. That is what we're all dealing with as human beings. We're wired for that. And so my research has led to, why do we want the pain and not something more beneficial? And how can we control it? And so, we could talk a little bit more about the control forgiveness side, because you said, I could never forgive somebody who killed my cat. And I'm going to suggest that there's a way, and that can be done pretty quickly and powerfully, that I've created. And that's kind of the last part of my book, is how to manage those types of situations in a way that's really satisfying to you for the long term, and not just that short dopamine hit.
I want to get to that, but these negative repercussions that you're talking about, are they not? I mean, they're culturally enforced, right? Like, depending on, like, I don't know, but I would assume that were this to happen, maybe, this occurred in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
You were raised maybe with like a certain set of like cultural values, and there's a certain, maybe political sway in the state that might have made you feel one way or another about getting revenge. But like, I feel like for somebody in Texas, it might be a little different. Like, they might feel fully justified.
They do, but what that means, that feeling fully justified means feeling fully, I acted on my desire to hurt you, and I feel good now, which is to say, revenge. Calling it justice or justified or sanctified doesn't change what happened, right? It doesn't change. You inflicted pain on another person because you wanted to, because you knew you would feel better for a little period of time if you did. In other words, you're trying to heal yourself. You're trying to stop the pain of the loss of your cat, for instance. How do I get rid of this pain? You just killed my cat. I have searing pain inside my skull.
Yeah.
How do I get rid of that? One way that I know is I'm wired to want to kill you now. And if I do that, I will feel good. You'll get the dopamine hit, but it'll be short-lived. And you said, well, aren't there some of the consequences, the negative consequences, are culturally imposed? And that's true. You could be jailed, or you could be suddenly surrounded by police who see you as a threat and shoot and kill you. Or the person you're trying to kill for killing your cat may be a better shot than you and nail you, and now your cat and you are gone, or your cat and you are shot. So there are a lot of risks, but those aren't the only. Like you said, you are aware, because you're a much more elevated person, that you'll feel regret. You're going to feel regret after you kill the person who killed your cat. You're going to feel a lot of pain for the rest of your life. It won't have removed the pain of the loss of your cat. And that's kind of the sudden insight that people get after somebody, the killer of their loved one has been executed or something like that. It's like they've been trying maybe for 20 years to get this guy to be put in a gas chamber or electric chair or hung or shot or whatever it is, or injected. And then they get their, the end of their quest has been reached. They got everything they wanted, and they believed on that moment their whole life would be changed and they'd be healed. And they walk away, and within minutes, they're miserable. There's no healing. The death of that person didn't heal the loss of their loved one. And that won't heal unless, unless there is some form of forgiveness inside of them. Not an offer to the now dead convict, but until they decide to heal themselves and release the pain, which is what forgiveness is really about. It's a decision to stop the pain. Let's think about it this way. The pain of your loss of the cat, where is that? Where does it exist? The pain. Where do you think it exists?
Well, in the brain.
In your own brain.
Yeah,
right?
in my brain, yeah.
Does it exist in mine?
No.
No. Or anybody's. Just yours.
Yeah.
Think about that. And inside your brain, it's really only framed by a memory of a cat and the killing of the cat, which are also, right, only in your brain. And your desire to retaliate or get justice, whatever you want to call it, is also where? Only where?
In the brain.
In your brain. So all of this is happening inside our brains. We don't need an external courtroom or an external gun or a tank or a bomb. What we need to do is go inside our heads and claim responsibility for our own brains and go, I've got to shut this pain circuit down, because if I don't, I'm going to live in pain for the rest of my life. And we need a way of activating this counterbalanced forgiveness experience in which pain is shut down to actually get rid of the pain, not just cover it up with a temporary dopamine hit, but to actually stop the pain and stop those revenge cravings.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could definitely see the value in that. It's not the kind of thing. That's not the kind. You wouldn't want to live with that kind of pain.
Right. But we don't know. I
duration.
mean, the society teaches us everything that's the opposite of everything I just said, right? That we as a society will, in order to keep kind of a social network that isn't completely destroyed, we, society, will inflict revenge for you. And that's what executions are, and that's what imprisonment is all about. It's social revenge seeking, using lawyers in a courtroom. And so what I've created is kind of the antidote to that. It's called the non-justice system. It's available. It's called Miracle Court as an app. It's free for anybody to use. And the way that it works is by doing what I just said. We go into the courtroom of the mind, where we're all running a courtroom every day. We're putting on trial every day, sometimes hour by hour. Sigmund Freud said this. We're hour by hour putting people on trial and deciding whether they're guilty for things that they've done to us. And then we're deciding whether there's going to be a sentence. And then at the last step, we sort of have to decide, are we going to carry out that sentence in the real world, or are we just going to leave it in our heads? Most of the time, we're leaving that punishment phase in our heads. But sometimes we let loose, right? And so what I've done is I create this courtroom experience in which you put on trial the person who wronged you. Let's say your cat, the person who killed your cat, right? Hypothetically.
Yeah.
Poor cat. I don't want to keep bringing up the cat, but it's a powerful, way of framing this. And so you put that person on trial, but you play all the roles because it's all in your head anyway. So we'll put the courtroom in your head where it needs to be for the healing to take effect. And in doing that, you play the victim. And so you get to, and trauma experts will say, psychological pain continues to last for people so long, and it's so painful because they rarely get the opportunity to be heard, to be acknowledged, for somebody to acknowledge what happened to them, and ultimately to hold accountable the person who wronged them. So I can do that inside your head safely. And you can be the victim, then you can testify as the victim in this imaginary courtroom, and then you testify as the defendant. And you have to come up with the other side of the story. What would they say if you're actually them? And we found in the research that we've done that people will throw themselves into that very hard and will really work to go, what would he or she say if they were on trial and they were explaining their side of the story? And sometimes that can lead to a really powerful empathy moment, because by changing roles, you're suddenly starting to see the conflict that you're in and the grievance that you have in an all new light. And that can be freeing at that point. But for a lot of people, it doesn't. And we move then next to, you get to be the judge and the jury, and you get to decide guilt, and you get to hand down a sentence. And then in the fourth step, you get to be the warden of whatever it is, the prison. And in my non-justice system, the punishment can be anything, even things that a real courtroom wouldn't allow. So you get to be the warden, but you have to be the warden, and you have to do the punishing. So if your punishment for the cat killing is, I'm going to have you attacked by 30 cats and have them maul you to death, and that's going to be very satisfying for me. But you got to be there for that. And what we know about revenge seeking is that being the instrument of another person's pain, you can't escape that experience of the pain that you're inflicting. It's like if you think about a hammer and a nail. A hammer slugs a nail, pounds a nail into a piece of wood. And we often think, oh, poor nail, it's getting pounded. But we don't think about poor hammer, because the hammer has to experience, by laws of physics, right, an equal and opposite force driven back into the hammer. So the hammer is hurting just as much as the nail with each strike. And I think that's very true with becoming the instrument of another person's pain. The more we try and inflict pain on other people, the more we have to feel it, because we are the inflictor. We're causing that pain, and it comes back to us in real time at that moment. And then in the last step of this process, so you've been all through that, and now you get to, and you have to become the judge of your own life. And you have to go, so as the judge of my own life, do I feel better having gone through this trial and punishing this person and getting all of the pain inflicted on them that I wanted? Did that really release all of my suffering, or did it just make it like 5,000 times worse? And most people will go, oh my God, I never want to do a trial, because trials are very painful and the punishment is painful. And so having done that and then bringing around and reminding them that this is all inside their head and it's all a result of an event that happened in the past that nobody with their senses can experience today, I asked them the question then. So imagine, you don't have to forgive, but just imagine if you did, what would you feel like? And like I said, your listeners should try this because it's just that simple. Just imagine it. And in every case that I've ever done it with someone on, including victims of serious sexual violence and relatives being murdered, they'll go, oh, I never really thought about how I would feel if I forgave. And they go, I just feel like a weight is suddenly lifted off my shoulders. You mean I don't have to put them on trial? You mean I don't have to punish them? You mean I can stop, I can end this quest that's been making me miserable? I can stop the pain today, for real? And I'm like, yeah. And then the question that they have to answer as the judge of their own lives is, do you decide to set yourself free from the wrongs of the past, or do you want to just keep on seeking justice in the form of revenge? It's up to you. You have to be accountable for your own brain. You can stop the pain now, or you can just keep on living in it.
It's definitely the way more evolved path to take.
Yeah.
That is for sure. But I don't know that anybody's ever regretted the killing of Osama bin Laden or Ramsay Bolton in Game of Thrones or Joffrey. You know, it's like these are like really evil people that had it coming. And
yeah, we could take bin Laden, right? So there was a lot of satisfaction among a lot of people when he was killed, right? Bin Laden looked like, however, a continual present threat.
like, what about
to the
accountability?
country, right?
Like,
well, even set aside accountability, what I'm saying is taking him out as an act of self-defense, because he expressed throughout decades his entire commitment to killing as many as Americans as possible. And doing that as an act of self-defense exclusively makes sense. Fight or flight, we're all going to defend ourselves, and he gave us no choice. We're going to fight, and he's out, right? But going to, let's say he had made it very clear that he was done with his terroristic ways, and it was a decade in, and we're still just trying to hunt him down to kill him for our own pleasure. That's revenge seeking, and it feels good, but only for a short amount of time. And if that's our only reason for doing it, I think a lot more people would have felt a lot more remorse for doing it, even though the crime that he committed was so intolerable and so unacceptable and so unnecessary. But think about bin Laden. I mean, he masterminded 9/11 because he saw himself as a victim. He saw the people of the Middle East as victims of America's aggression first. It's interesting. It just goes on and on and on. He sees himself as a victim, convinces a group of people to fly planes into the World Trade Towers. America now sees itself as a victim, convinces a bunch of really great people to enlist in the military, to go over and just inflict, wholesale pain across hundreds of thousands of people, because it wasn't just bin Laden. If we had limited to bin Laden, that might be one thing, but we didn't. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed for our revenge-seeking pleasure.
That's true. Yeah. That is true. I mean, I think we obviously ought to aspire to be more surgical with our revenge-seeking behaviors, or justice-seeking behaviors. It's obviously, the penalty should be commensurate with the crime. Although in the case of bin Laden, obviously, he's just one man, and he was at the helm of the loss of so much life.
Sure.
It kind of calls into question free will. Like, do you believe we have free will or not? I mean, if everybody is just sort of acting in accordance with their own sort of the way that they've conditioned and bringing to every decision, their past traumas and whatnot. It kind of makes you wonder whether or not, we actually are capable of free will.
That's a great question. And I think the jury is out in my mind on it. I sometimes don't believe that there could be free will. Neurologically, we can, explain this in, neurochemical and circuitry terms. Does that mean there's any free will? Because, like I said, you could want cotton candy after your cat is killed to make yourself feel better, but you don't. You are wired to want the pain, similar pain inflicted upon the person who did it. How can that be free will if we're wired and driven so hard to make that happen? And yet other times I'm convinced that, I'm moving my arm at my will right now and nothing is telling me to do this. So I don't have a good answer.
Yeah. Well, I bring it up because I was listening recently with a buddy to Sam Harris debate Daniel Dennett, I think. And Sam Harris is sort of, I think, on the... he takes the position that we don't really have free will. I'm not all that fluent in his, in his philosophy, but I think that's sort of the general gist that I was able to glean from the back and forth podcast I was listening to. But then Daniel Dennett's like, yeah, I mean, maybe not, but like in practical terms, yeah, we're pretty much free agents, and your actions should have consequences. But yeah, so it's an interesting.
But and then it
question.
goes to the why. What kind of consequences, and why should your actions have consequences? According to what law, right? Or is it this revenge circuitry and this what evolutionary psychologists believe? Kind of the leading theory is that humans evolved this experience of pleasure with revenge seeking. Maybe, in the Pleistocene era, maybe in the Ice Age days when humans had to start living in communities, and we, in order to make that work and survive it, we needed to have a way to stop people from like stealing your wife or stealing the lion you just killed or the meat or complying with social norms of the group, right? So causing people to experience pleasure in revenge seeking is kind of like causing them to experience pleasure to have sex or eat, right? It's survival. And so it's an adaptive strategy then. And it's an even adaptive strategy now, as long as you're able to control it. And the reason that you're seeking revenge is literally for survival. But what we see now in 2025 of human history is that we seek revenge for harms to our ego and not survival. So even the cat, which, you go, the cat is a freaking member of my family. You killed it. You killed a member of my family. But you're not, if you go and shoot the person who killed your cat, you're not doing it to survive. The guy didn't threaten your survival.
Right.
He killed your cat. Terrible thing. And I'm not in any way excusing that. But it's not a matter of survival. So if you take his life, you're not acting for the reason that revenge evolved. You're now acting because of your emotional attachment to the cat and your need to feel some dopamine because you have a lot of pain because the cat is no longer with you and was cruelly killed. And so is that pathological? In other words, is that harmful to us? And in a world now in 2025 where we have social media platforms that allow us at light speed to infect millions of people with the same grievance within a second, and you can instantly have 1 million people feeling wounded. If you put on the internet, this guy just killed my cat, and here's a picture of my cat alive, and here's a picture of my cat dead. This is outrageous. Click. And you send it out on your platforms. I don't know how many followers you have. Lots. Way more than I, because I have none. But if you did that, because of human ability to empathize, almost all of those people will feel your pain, very real in their minds. And they're going to want the same revenge against that guy that you want. And the social media platforms also give them the ability to send that to all of their followers. It also gives them the ability to retaliate against that guy, maybe not with a gun, but maybe to hunt him down and start attacking him on the media platform. So it gives you an instant way to gratify your revenge craving at very low cost, right, to yourself. So humans weren't prepared for social networking platforms. I mean, just descended upon us. And we're not ready to manage that many people wanting revenge for the same thing, like all day long, every day, and giving them the ability to retaliate in these socially valuable ways that are very painful to the people who are victimized by those retaliatory tweets. So it's something to think about at the biggest social level that we can think of. And we're seeing it in our governments right now, at the federal, state, and local levels. We're having lots of grievances and lots of revenge seeking from the current administration. And it crosses all borders.
Yeah.
It's Republican, Democrat, it's liberal and conservative. It's all there. I see it as a very revenge addicted nation right now, and these things cycle.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's like, it's easy to write the desire for revenge off as just like ego gratifying behavior, but on the other hand, we know that emotional pain light up the same neural pathways as physical pain.
Yeah.
So,
right?
Like, can you fault us?
Yeah. Oh, and it's not a fault. It is not a judgment. It's more about the question is, should we be treating it and preventing it? Should we regard these desires when you're going to act on them in a way that hurts yourself or other people? And we regard that as wrong.
Yeah.
We regard it as you're going to need to go to prison because you just killed the guy who killed your cat. Because we, the group, the society, view you as threat, right? Now, so we don't want you to kill that guy. We'd rather you manage this without violence, for sure, right? The society. And if you can't, and let's say that's not enough, and you go, that felt good to take him out. You know who I really need to kill next? All of his family members, bastard, right? And all of his friends. And now you're just gone. And you're fully revenge addicted, and you are a threat, and you're going to probably get shot and killed in the process.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an extreme example, but that can happen in nonviolent ways that can harm relationships that you value, or that we value. Anybody could value. These things affect, intimate partner relationships. They affect parent-child. These types of revenge seekings can be extremely damaging to ourselves, and to know that it's an addictive process and that there are ways to control it, and that if you see the signs, I call it a revenge attack. And I feel like one of the things we could do better is tell people about the dangers of revenge attacks, which is to say, like a heart attack, if you're experiencing a revenge attack, which is you are ruminating all the time about a grievance, and you are fantasizing about retaliating, particularly with violence, and you are unable to stop and shut that down, and you are now identifying a target, and you're now acquiring weapons, or you have access to weapons, and you now identify a location and a time. You are experiencing a revenge attack, and we ought to know those signs. The way we know the sign of a heart attack is like pain in the left shoulder, and that should be like an immediate, for the victim and anybody around them, a 911 call or a 988 call to go and treat it as a medical emergency, because it is, before the violence happens and before they need a police response with guns, because now they have a killer on their hands. So we could do that. We don't, but we could. And I would hope that we would reach you before you go and kill the person who killed your cat. Because if we did, I'm going to say that we'd probably do a pretty good job of helping you reduce your pain level pretty fast and decide you don't want to kill that guy after all, even though a part of you does and may always for all your life. But there are other ways to manage the craving to kill him that don't involve the killing.
Yeah. No.
And it's a healing process.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's super important. Yeah. Is there any evidence that other animals exhibit revenge-seeking behaviors?
Yeah, there is some. Primates do. It's been a while since I covered that a little bit in my book, and I'm trying to think of the other categories. But primates are a strong feature. So they will. Some groups of primates have been shown in studies to retaliate, which is to say, again, it's this temporal thing. All animals will act in self-defense, fight or flight. They'll either flee or they'll respond, with some sort of force. But what we're talking about again here is, would a primate, retaliate for a wrong that happened in the past?
Yeah.
And they are carrying it around in their memory, and now they see the aggressor, the person who did it, or the primate who did it, and will retaliate. And the answer is yes, there is evidence.
Wow.
Of that. Yeah.
But just primates.
Yeah. There are a couple of other, and I forget the others. I'm
dolphins?
sorry, I forget.
Dolphins are thought to
I have
be
not
pretty
read that about
evolved.
dolphins, but they are very
They have sex
bright.
for pleasure.
Yeah, right. They're
Apparently.
very bright. So they may. I just don't know the answer on dolphins. I didn't look too deeply in that, but I know that primates are a strong one for that.
Wow. Well, this was a fascinating conversation, James. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me, and thanks for your great questions, and
of course,
sharing these tough. These are tough aspects of human nature, and we need to talk more about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Very philosophical as well.
It is.
Yeah. They really cut to the core of what it means to be human.
Yeah. That's true.
So yeah, very cool. I've got one last question for you before we get to that. Where can listeners pick up your book? How can they find you on social media? Oh, you said you're not on social media.
Well, I'm minimally. I'll just say very minimally. I have a Twitter. I'm at James Kimmel Jr. But I have a website called www.jameskimmeljr.com. And there's a lot of additional information. And so there's like a quiz there that you can use to analyze how often you think about revenge, and whether or not you're kind of doing that too much, and whether you're engaged in it too much. There's some other free content there, and then there's this app, the Miracle Court app that I was telling you about, that anybody can use for free. It's it's a audio-driven app where I take you through a trial of the person who wronged you. So it's very intimate. It's all inside your head where it needs to be. And my book, The Science of Revenge, coming out on May 27th. That's available. It'll be everywhere.
Dope.
Amazon and every other place.
All the places. Well, very valuable work, and the app sounds awesome as well. Yeah. Thanks for putting that together.
Thank you.
Last question that gets asked everybody on the show: what does living a genius life mean to you?
Wow, that's a great question. I think for me, a genius life is a life in which you're aware of what we've been talking about, and you're aware of your own power, your superpower to forgive. A genius is someone who can manage the endless stream of grievances in their life, manage that pain, heal that pain, and continue on track, achieving their goals, whatever their goals are, and not allowing these desires, to retaliate, to take them off track and potentially ruin their lives. So that is a genius to me, a genius life.
Amen.
Okay.
Thanks again, James.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones who may benefit from it, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace, everybody. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.